So, Karin Gurtner, you are the co-founder and the educational director of Art of Motion Academy. And my understanding of what you do, having done some of your trainings, is that you offer movement, or maybe more specifically Pilates-based anatomy education for movement teachers. And you offer trainings all over the world, and you've authored books. And also, there's something that I found on your website that I loved so much because I think it really encapsulates your approach. And it was, you posed this question, why practice? And the answer that you gave was because movement love strengthens more than your body, it strengthens your humanity. And so, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me. And second of all, does my experience of what you do match up with your experience of what you do? And then third, can you unpack that quote a little bit?
So first of all, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Karina. I really appreciate it. And yes, your experience of me and what you know, what you read, maybe what you experienced through my work is it's a match. The one thing I would say is just in terms of the bigger picture, and also not just the way we conduct our education courses, but also this is a clear distinction in my mind at the, say, if I just speak about my professional pathway as an educator and as a developer of education concepts. I would say my first 8 years were focused on developing a contemporary Pilates curriculum. And as you said, like explain the anatomy of movement from a more holistic perspective of basically relational anatomy. I would say the last 12 years, then my focus, although I love Pilates, I believe in the value of contemporary Pilates, absolutely. I shifted my focus to incorporating fascia deliberately, the qualities of fascia. And so the Slings myofascial training concept evolved. And it was a very deliberate decision from the beginning to hold these two concepts separately, not to separate them, but to differentiate the individual values that they offer. So with the Slings myofascial training concept, although I'm inspired by contemporary Pilates movements, also by yoga. So a long time ago, I used to be a yoga teacher and many other forms of movement, and mainly, and I think that's what we will also speak about, by science. And so I would say the Slings myofascial training concept, which really revolves around fascia in motion, is as inspired by contemporary Pilates as it is by many other forms of movement. I think that's valuable because I think it really offers a different dimension to, say, yoga, if the work resonates with a yoga teacher.
So that actually,
good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
That actually leads into a question that I had, which is that, my experience of what you offer is that it provides a real depth of understanding of anatomy, and in particular fascia, but through movement, which is, it's kind of crazy that it feels like that would be a unique way to understand anatomy, but it does feel like a unique way to understand anatomy, at least in the way that it's delivered. And I understand that you also draw, at least in part, on the anatomy trains, myofascial meridian lines and that kind of thing for some of what you do. And so when I think about that, like it seems to me that the task of translating that kind of anatomical stuff into a movement method must have been a Herculean task. And I'm really curious about how you went about it, because I remember doing a few of the anatomy trainings for manual therapists. And I remember, and I'm not a manual therapist, and I remember just being in there being like, I just have zero understanding of where I would even begin that kind of a translation process, but you did it. And so I would love to know what that process was.
Wonderful. So I would love to share. And I think it then leads us to answering your third question, basically before. How does this kind of movement work? Evoke more movement love, and why is this enriching our life in general? Because one thing I'm really conscious of, and I know you are too, to not use empty words. If that's what I say, I have a story. May the story be right or wrong, but there is a story that actually led to this rather big statement. So, excellent question. So, how did I get there? Because I like you, it's a big task, and I would say for the last 10 years of my life, I thought about very few other things. So I actually need to go back in time so I can tell a story that's actually comprehensible. So I'm really going back in time to my, almost teenage years, when I went to an art academy. And I had a brilliant art teacher. And what he did, he narrowed the scope basically of what we would paint. So he would be very specific. He would say, you have a donkey, and that's a real experience. You have a donkey, you have a dog, you have a cat, you have a rooster. They stand on each other's back. There's a brick wall behind them. The light is coming from the right-hand corner. So it seems very narrow, but the boundaries he set enabled us to, creative people, sometimes our minds can go, to the universe and never come back. So he contained it. And then the art that came from it was magnificent. It was here painting, drawing, interesting angles. And so when I did like you, first I had Tom's book. I was like, wow. And now what? Then I made up a story. I was like, maybe I need some more information to back up my story. So I did the courses for manual therapists. And at the time, I had no experience with manual work. I was like, oh, this is great. But there is a gap between what I'm learning here and what I'm practicing or what I'm teaching. And so then I did actually the whole training in structural integration with Tom and other faculty. It was awesome to get a clearer picture. Okay, how is all of this translated into manual work? And how can I translate the manual work into movement? And that's, Karina, when the universe of possibilities opened, and it had to be contained to become practically usable. So basically, I drew from my art school. I was like, okay, let's contain the universe and go, I'm working with these 12 myofascial meridians. That's containment in itself. And then in parallel, I'm diving more into research. And you know that too, the more you dive into research, the bigger the universe becomes. And then so it was really a consolidation process to then go, okay, like all of these things I learn, it's not what do I include, but what do I leave out for now? What do I focus on? And then start to make sense of, always in relation to movement. So here is what I'm learning in science. And then I need to translate it into movement. And of course, it's my translation. It's not exact, it's subjective. And then apply it practically in my body with clients when I still taught, teach it to my teachers, they teach it to clients, wait for the feedback loop to come back to me, and then go like, oh, this is working. Oh, this is not quite working. Why is this working? And then basically keep inquiring until the story became clear. And I would say it took a good 5 years for this, you know, for the endless possibility to take on a picture that was like, okay, that's clear. That's the individual parts are resonant with each other, and it practically works.
It's I was glad to hear that it took 5 years and it wasn't just like it happened in 6 months and it was, that's a long, intricate and methodical process.
Mm.
Mm.
Yes. And it's still, it really is a tensegrity, a system where everything informs everything else. Like that's how I also view the body, and especially through the fascial system. And Karina, maybe it took even more than 5 years, because I started with anatomy, trains, and motion, as you know, and in parallel worked on Slings Essentials, which is really fascial anatomy explained in the context of body, mind, and movement. And then the actual exercise courses developed from that. So it wasn't exercise was there, and like it was there in my experience, but not as an education course. But then, of course, as a group of people who applied this work, learned more from real life, from real people who are, embodying this work from the exercises, it changed the view onto anatomy, trains, and motion and Slings Essentials. So it was this, on many levels changing system, and it's still evolving. It's now, I would say now after 12 years, I go like, oh, okay, it's not complete, it's still evolving, but it came together. So I would say 5 years kind of have a picture that I feel comfortable enough sharing with other people, but it took really 10 years to go like, okay, now I think we've got a story that we can polish rather than shape.
That makes sense. So I have a few questions for you sort of about, fascia and kinesthesia and all of that kind of thing. But before I get into that, I have a completely different question that kind of also relates back to that, the third part of the questions that I had for you at the beginning. And I've had this question, or it's not so much a question, but it was just like such a light bulb moment for me years ago. And I was listening to an interview that you did. And in that interview, the interviewer said to you, and I have told this story so many times when I've been teaching because it really impacted me. But the interviewer said to you, every person that I've met that has been involved with your company is kind of obsessed with what you're doing. And what it is, do you think, what is it, do you think, about your company and your culture that is inspiring people to be so passionate about this work? And what you said is that what I teach is structural integrity. And so my company needs to represent that. And we basically need to live what we preach. And we're very clear about that. And so that's what we attract. And it just really hit me, because I think in yoga, we would say something similar, which would be if you want to know the effect of the practice, look at the life of the teacher. And I think there's something just really fascinating and also intangible in some way about the fact that the quality of the relationship that you have with the feeling and the structure of your body can be evidenced in the quality of the structures that you create in the world and the way that they make other people feel. And I just would love it if you would speak about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the reminder. I do remember this interview. I think, Karina, that is the essence. This is what motivates my work is life. I never went on a quest with like, oh, I want to develop a movement concept. I think it came more from I want to make the most out of this life. And I want to love this life. I want to love this body I'm in. And I want to, because I'm in relation with my environment, I want to make the best contribution to my environment. And then it comes back and it will create this, this infinite circle where we lift each other up. I think this, in hindsight, this has always been my motivator for this work. And my avenue is movement. I noticed that very, very early in my life with yoga practice as well, how I could change my inner feeling through movement, which made me then a more generous person, a more inquisitive person. Like, it really brought up a lot of good qualities, which then came back. So I really I believe in this, and in this company here at our head office, it needs to be one. If there is dissonance in one area, if we don't live as a company accordingly to these values of integrity, the work's not going to work. The work is just the cover of a book that's not filled with content.
What do you think are the
And that's really that.
You go.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, what do you think are the qualities of movement that create that level of integrity? Because I feel as though, if you move rigidly, you will probably come to a place where you realize that you're relating to the world rigidly as well, and probably to yourself rigidly. And, the opposite is also true. And so I wonder, you use the word integrity, which is a big word for me as well. And so I wonder, what is it about movement that generates integrity for you?
I think this really, it's a great question. Thank you, Karina. This really brings us to the fascial system. And I don't want to narrow it down too much, but I think some containment is actually really good. And what you spoke about before is kinesthesia and proprioception and interoception. And kinesthesia, in simple terms, basically is our sense of, enables us to move and to feel. And movement is life. So that's one big thing there. Without movement, there is no life. So that's something we all share. And then there is feeling. And I do believe, if what's the home that I have? It is my physical home, is this body. And through fascia, we can be on a path of feeling differently at home in our body. So I can have structural integrity, let's call it like this, meaning the individual physical parts of my body relate to each other well. And chances are it gives me a greater sense of, functionality and all sorts of really, really good things, performance. But it is the feeling of being at home in myself, take ownership of my actions, of my feelings, know when it's the right time to be in my feelings, to be emotionally expressive, and when is a time to become an observer of my feelings and not say the next best thing that, that wants to come out, that changes my relationship with the environment. And so this is an element of integrity that is emotional, that has a mental aspect that then comes together with the physical integrity. And I think in my mind, these are the integrities that I want to realign in myself, and then through the work I do, maybe also give people tools to also work in a clear manner on this integrity, because there are a million ways. And again, if the body is something you like to work with, I think we really can change our larger integrity through creating more physical integrity, but not just physical. And you know that very well, also tap into our emotional integrity through the body, especially through the fascial system and the interoceptive quality of the fascial system, the feeling quality.
So, could you talk a little bit about, for people who maybe aren't as familiar with this, talk a little bit about fascia as a sensory organ and this relationship between fascia and kinesthesia. And then I also have some questions for you about interoception and proprioception.
Mm-hmm. So it's one of my you know, favorite topics, very close to my heart. So I think for someone who is not yet that familiar with the topic, it's actually good to go from the outside in and start with the five senses: our sight, our hearing, our taste, our smell, and our sense of touch. So these are senses that give us information that's coming from the outside. But then whatever you see, say I'm looking at you and I go like, wow, Karina is beautiful. And it evokes a feeling in me, but it's not the Zoom image that evokes the feeling in me. It's my inner sensory, my inner sense that evokes that feeling. And so the interoceptive sense is an internal sense versus our external or sense that take external information. So now we're on the inside of the body in the fascial system. The fascial system is very interoceptive. Interoception is in many systems in the body, but it's all internal. And it basically informs us how we feel. And it is physical feelings like hunger and thirst and temperature perception, heartbeat. So very substantial. And then the other element is the emotional feeling. So how do we feel about that sense of hunger? How agreeable is the temperature? And how do we perceive time, or do we trust another person or not? And how do we feel about that sense of trust or distrust that we experience? Now, in terms of interoception, the classical definition was relating to the physical sensations I described first, like hunger, for example. So it was said it's coming from the and basically keeps us alive. So need to drink, need to put on a jacket. So homeostasis, it's called. And then the more modern definition includes all of the phenomenological experiences that we have. So all felt experiences. And the biggest umbrella term, and it's also from some perspective of neuroscience, it's validated. It also includes pain. So it could be any sensation from the physical to the emotional to also a pain experience. And I'm naming the fascial system particularly because the fascial system is highly innervated. So we have a lot of receptors that pick up information from the body and then inform our nervous system what is going on in the body. And in terms of ratio, at the moment, the number I'm holding, and I'm holding it lightly, research does change, is 1 to 7. So proprioceptors, so those who organize our movements, 1. Interoceptors who inform us how we feel, 7. So biology really wants us to feel. And if we work with the fascial system deliberately, we really can change the way we feel.
I love that so much because I feel as though societally we're so dead set against feeling. And I love that you're like, no, no, the body really wants you to feel the things. Because it also feels like that is such an important, like, physical capacity for our ability to create meaning and value. You know, to know what's important to us, to know how we feel about things is kind of key to our ability to direct our attention and make good decisions and all of that kind of thing.
Karina, 100%. And I do read a lot. And there is no, without feeling, we wouldn't be alive. And I agree, like there is still so much value in the societies that we live on objectivity and be clear and make the right decision, but you can't make the right decision without feeling. There is no such thing as objectivity in us humans. Like, we are feeling creatures that have a cognitive mind with which we can rationalize our feelings and then go, okay, what's a good decision to make here? But it's always an interplay, and to be more aware of how feelings drive your behavior, I think it's gold.
Hmm.
Mm.
I have maybe a bit of a left of center question that just popped into my head.
Mm.
So maybe you'll be like, that was a really weird question, Karina. Let's move on to the next one, or maybe it'll. We'll see. But you know, I was thinking about part of your answer in terms of yoga philosophy, in the sense that you were saying that our sensory organs are what allow the outside world in, and then we figure out how we feel about that, etc. And so I was thinking about it in terms of this model of Samkhya philosophy, which also talks about the role of the senses in allowing the outside world in. But then it also talks about the process of letting the inside world out. And I wonder if there is some kind of neat anatomical correlate for that as well.
What comes to my mind most immediately is this, and I'm not sure, you tell me if I'm not answering your question directly. So what comes to my mind, I'm going back to the fascial system and its interoceptive capacity. And there's a wonderful research also from neuroscience that shows that the degree of interoceptive awareness we have relates to the feeling of empathy we have towards other beings. So with a diminished sense of interoceptive awareness, our empathy, for example, is changed. And for me, that is a direct, what this is something I'm putting out. And then the way I relate through empathy creates a different environment.
That is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really love that, and it makes perfect sense. You know, the more that you can feel you, the more you can feel others.
Mm-hmm. And I feel in my own experience and through observation, the clearer I am also about a boundary, the boundary is permeable. So there's not who I feel, and it's unrelated to my environment. So I'm not saying this, but the clearer I am about my own feelings, the clearer I am with my projections. And there's also amazing research about that, how much, maybe a feeling of hunger can be like, I distrust this person. My gut feeling tells me, not right. But all I need is really some food, and suddenly that person is so much more trustworthy. So that I know how much do I actually project from my inside to other people, and it's not their thing. And so it's about connection, but also about healthy differentiation.
That feels like such an important capacity for movement teachers, especially if I think about the yoga sphere where people can, come to a practice and have a lot of stuff going on that they're using that practice to process some things you know about, some things you don't. But the need as a teacher to be really clear about what your own stuff is so that you can be really clear and hold clear and safe boundaries with students as well.
Very much so.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So something I've heard you talk about before is that you've spoken about proprioception as being an objective skill or a hard skill, and interoception as being sort of a soft or a subjective skill. And so I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit.
So and I actually excellent. This is a great question. And then I would love to add on because I'm still heading towards your initial question. So I called proprioception more of a hard skill and it being objective, because what proprioceptors in our body do, they receive information. So let's say here is a proprioceptive nerve ending. It sits in fascia. The fascia is tension that changes the shape of the receptor, and it knows, okay, that much tension is in the tissue, and then I know when I extend my arm, that's the position of my arm, of my back. So we receive information, or here we receive information from the body, and to me it really is fairly neutral. It doesn't mean anything if my arms are out to the side yet. So proprioception allows me to organize my posture, coordinate my body movements. And then there is the interoceptive aspect. It's like, okay, what does that movement or that body position mean to me? So sometimes, and you maybe have done that with Mumu too, I do a little exercise where we take the arms out to the side, we make a proprioceptive assessment, and I was like, okay, and then we keep the arms out for a long time, and then you have all sorts of emotionally motivated responses, right? But the arms are just, at a certain angle. That's it. So therefore, I made that differentiation because I feel in movement, it's really important. It's not the posture, the postural alignment, or except you're maybe a ballet dancer or a circus artist, like it's not, or a performer of some sort, like, okay, then your coordination really matters. But what matters for most people in everyday life is, how does this make them feel? And we see that often in classes where this becomes a little bit muddled up. It's like, oh, this yoga pose really hurts my back. It was like this inanimate, non-tangible thing, the pose hurt. No, it's not that's not good for you. It's your your body state at this very moment. When you do this movement, it doesn't resonate with you. And so it kind of goes back to, then I take ownership of myself. It's not the angle of the arm or the yoga pose or basically what happens proprioceptively. It's how I feel about it. Now, that said, Karina, I need also to add something on, and it kind of merges these together. Because nothing is black and white. I just make it black and white sometimes. So I have a concept, and then I'm kind of, changing the color in my own concept. So proprioception, for example, and pain perception are like, they exclude themselves. They're like opposing magnets. So when let me give you a very simple example. So say I'm moving my spine regularly, And so all these proprioceptive nerve or nerve endings receive a lot of signals and they are happy. And then I choose not to move my back, maybe because I heard, this movement really isn't good for you, or I'm forced to not move my back because I have an injury. And then the receptors no longer receive information and they don't love quiet. And one of my favorite researchers, Robert Schleip, he had this great analogy where he said, they're like reporters in the summer lull. They are looking for information. And then they find something really small, but they make a big story out of it. And that's then they're actually called wide dynamic neurons. And so then they receive a very normal stimulus like, I sneeze and I turn around and do something. And then I have this tiny little pinch in my back, but it's blown out. It was like, oh my God, I just hurt my back. It really hurts. And so then I have this initial pain. And then if I keep holding my still either because I want to or because I can't move it yet the way I want, the whole situation just exacerbates and the proprioceptors still don't get information because I avoid or have to avoid movement. The pain is held for longer. There are still these receptors still blow up every little message that comes in, a little bit of movement or a little bit of this. And so I'm getting into a really unhealthy cycle. And so, yes, I still do think proprioception has a rather matter-of-fact quality. However, the lack of it can trigger a whole cascade of, in this case, adverse feelings that are highly subjective.
That is fascinating. And I wonder, how can we develop a level of discernment that allows us to tell the difference between a pain signal that matches what's going on and one that might be exaggerated?